Welcome to It Depends, a sales tax podcast by TaxConnex. I'm your host, Brian Greer. Sales and use tax can be confusing and very overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Whether you work in industry or at a CPA firm, or just someone who wants to stay informed about the latest sales tax laws, we've got you covered. Periodically, we'll explore different aspects of sales tax. So whether you're a tax pro or a novice, tune in and join us as we attempt to simplify the complexity of the sales tax world. This is It Depends, because with sales tax, there's rarely just one answer, and often that's our answer to many questions. It just depends.
Welcome to the second edition of our sales tax crime series. Today we're going to talk about TYCO former chairman and CEO Dennis Kozlowski and a very lavish and eccentric lifestyle that this gentleman led as he led the TYCO business to extraordinary heights. I'd like to talk a little bit about sales tax in general, just to kind of set the tone. Generally, sales tax is applied to sales at retail of tangible personal property and enumerated services. So, for example, if you walk into any store and buy an item of tangible personal property, you can expect there to be a sales or a use tax applicable to that transaction. As you escalate into high-end prices of things or high-end products, that tax amount can be quite substantial and meaningful to the buyer. And it tends to lead people down a path of doing things inappropriately to try to avoid the big tax bill, the big tax hit. And in sales and use tax, it's because it's a transaction-based tax and because there's so many transactions every day throughout the country, it becomes an easy target for people and for companies to take advantage of the opportunity to avoid the sales tax. And that's the story we're going to talk about today and Dennis Kozlowski. Dennis was operating out of the state of New York in his business activities and his residency. But like many eccentric CEOs, he had multiple properties. And he had properties in New Hampshire, and I believe he had some other properties in other parts of the country, maybe even the world. And the case that we're going to talk about today is actually interesting because a lot of times we'll talk about business activities. In fact, our first crime series edition was related to a restaurateur and their business activities and the collection of sales tax and the failure to remit it. In this particular case, we actually kind of navigate away from the true business activity and it becomes more of a personal matter. And essentially what happened was Mr. Kozlowski decided that he was going to outfit his home with expensive and eccentric art. And he went to various art dealers and actually got them to conspire with him to avoid sales tax on these expensive and elaborate art purchases. Eventually, this caught up to him. There was a major investigation led by the Manhattan District Attorney back in the 2005 timeframe. Actually, it was earlier than that when this sort of investigation started. And they set out to identify people who were going into various retailers. And this was primarily targeting art dealers and jewelers. And what would happen is, this is particularly common in jewelry. Someone walks into a store, identifies a very expensive piece of jewelry that they want to purchase, and let's call it a $100,000 piece of jewelry. And with an 8% sales tax, that's an $8,000 addition to the cost of that $100,000 piece. And so what the customer will do is ask the retailer to actually ship the product to them in another state, perhaps a state like New Hampshire that doesn't have a sales or a use tax. And if the retailer agrees to ship the product to New Hampshire and the product is actually boxed and shipped to New Hampshire, there's a good chance that would qualify as an exempt transaction. However, what tends to happen in these situations is that the buyer says, hey, I'm going to go ahead and take possession of this $100,000 piece of jewelry here at the store. Wink, wink. You put an empty package together, mail it to my New Hampshire address, and we'll all find ourselves in good shape at the end of this transaction. Well, as as you can imagine, this was happening fairly commonly, particularly in a state like New York, where there's extraordinary evidence of wealth and distribution of products and services that are quite expensive. So the district attorney identified Dennis Kozlowski and their investigation, which is an excellent opportunity to publicize the fact that this is not going to be a tolerated experience or effort on the part of personal or individuals. And so eventually in 2005, Dennis was actually convicted of embezzlement from TYCO. So this was more than just a sales tax matter, but the sales tax matter was essentially a $3.2 million ticket item in this particular conviction. And so that conviction led to not only a penalty in terms of fines and financial impacts to the tune of $3.2 million, but the overall conviction that encompassed both embezzlement and other tax evasion type activities netted Kozlowski 6.5 years in prison. These sort of exercises are not uncommon, as I described earlier. They happen in probably every state. One of the things that's unique about sales tax is the states actually get together and form, I'll call them coalitions. They're associations. And for example, in the Southeast, there's the CETA, Southeastern Tax Administrators Association. And I believe there's 9 states that are part of CETA. And these associations sort of collaborate to try to identify situations like these. So when one state is in a local store, let's say in Charlotte, North Carolina, auditing that store for sales tax purposes, and they see significant jewelry shipments to another state, to another address in another state, they'll flag those items, and then they'll send that other state administrator a list of those items and give that administrator an opportunity to go and investigate their purchasing activity or their taxpayers' purchasing activity to see if they've paid any consumer's use tax on that tangible personal property. So it is a factor in terms of whether you're in a business transaction or a personal individual transaction. People are watching, and there are data gatherers out there in the form of auditors, and they may not be knocking at your door today, but they're probably at the door of one of your vendors, one of your shopping experiences. And so it just is another story in how devastating it can be, including significant financial impact as well as potential prison sentences to try to avoid sales and use tax, just like any other tax avoidance or tax theory that or strategy that you might employ. So it's, again, another story in don't commit the crime. You don't have to do the time, and be compliant.
This has been It Depends, with another episode explaining the complexities surrounding sales and use tax. We'll see you next time.